The Catholic Morning Show.
This is Iowa Catholic Radio, and we're delighted to have you with us this morning. I'm Bo Bonner with Matt Wilkham, Ayden Pugh, Alexia Baker, all of us grateful you stopped in. We want you to stop in tomorrow at 7 a.m. as well. We're 15 minutes away from the top of the new hour. Let's go to our final guest of the day, Steve Ray. You know him, convert extraordinaire. He's all over the place, multiple books, but he comes on every month to dive deep into ideas with us. And today he's going to talk about the Immaculate Conception. Steve, thanks for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Thank you, Bo. Always happy to join you guys. I love your station, and I love interviewing with you, so always happy to be here.
Well, we are happy to have you, and especially when it comes to something like the Immaculate Conception. When people hear this, of course, if you're Catholic, you know, maybe that's a little bit more, enculturated, as it were. But I know for people thinking about converting, like I did, that this is sometimes something that they get hung up on. So just out of the gate, what do we mean by Immaculate Conception, and how many times is it, quote-unquote, used in the Bible, right?
Yeah, I used to try to convert Catholics back in my evangelical days, and you'd ask them a question like, all right, Bo, where do you find the Immaculate Conception in the Bible? And then the Catholic, they'd roll their eyes back in their head, and they'd start to sweat. But first of all, let's just say this. When someone asks, where do you find that in the Bible? It is, in a way, a trick question because it's trying to force you to accept their methodology. In other words, for a Protestant, everything has to be found explicitly in the Bible or it's not true. Basically, that's their theory. So they try to force you into their box. But I always say, when someone says, where do you find that in the Bible? The answer is, where do you find in the Bible that you have to find everything in the Bible?
Correct.
You don't have to find everything in the Bible. The words Immaculate Conception are not in the Bible, but also the word Trinity is not in the Bible. And yet, as a Protestant, I would prattle on about the Trinity all the time, but it's not a word not found in the Bible. It is a word that helps explain concepts and realities that are in the Bible. And when you put the puzzle pieces all together, like with the Trinity, you come up with, this is the truth. Look at there. 3 persons in one God, 3 persons. And what shall we call it? Because there's no word for it in the Bible. Let's call it the Trinity. And it's the same with the Immaculate Conception. So we have Mary. It means that she was conceived without the stain of original sin. All have sinned. Adam and Eve, this is the way I like to explain it. Adam and Eve were born with the grace of God in their souls. They were going to live and be immortal. They had the grace of God in their souls. When Eve and Adam sinned, that life of God died in them. God said, if you do this, you're going to die. And they did immediately, and their bodies followed later. But their soul, that life of God left them. It died. And so what happened then is everybody that was born after that time was born, in a way, with a genetic deficiency. We were all born without something we were supposed to have, the life of God in our souls. But then God says, I'm going to start over again. I'm not going to wipe them out. I'm going to start over again. And, Eve was an Immaculate Conception. So we have 2 Immaculate Conceptions in the Bible. One is Eve. She was conceived immaculately. She was created by God without sin. She had none of that evil or sin in her life. She chose that and brought it into her life. So God says, I'm going to start over again with a new humanity. I'm not going to wipe these out. I'm just going to remake it in a sense. And I'm going to have another Immaculate Conception. And from her, I'm going to bring my son who will start a whole new kingdom, a whole new race. So Mary is the mother of all the living of this new race called the Church.
And, as understood as a dogma, luckily, many people have got to hear, for instance, my co-host on the Uncommon with Bud and I. He's a Newman guy, so they've heard stuff like development of doctrine, and they've heard dogmatic declarations. But people might say, well, why was it so late? Why did the Church, as it were, take her time to declare the dogma of the Immaculate Conception all the way in the 1800s? And what does it mean to say that this is the fruit of a development of doctrine instead of, quote unquote, something new that came up with those centuries later?
Well, first let's deal with why did it get defined later. Things get defined when they become a problem. In other words, when they're challenged. This is one of the rules of theology is that we see in the history of the church. The first 5 centuries, all of the arguments and debates about who is Jesus? Is he God? Is he man? Is he a combination of the two? Is he 2 puzzle pieces put together, God and man? Or what is he? How do you explain him? And that's where we came out with all the definitions of Christ and the Trinity. Things don't get defined until they have become an issue before they're argued with. And the very fact that Mary's Immaculate Conception is so late in history tends to prove that it was never an issue. Always everybody believed that she was. St. Augustine, for example, said, she is the all-holy one, and don't ever let my ears hear anyone speak of sin related to Mary. I will cover my ears and run from the room. This is back in the 300s, 400s. So this is not something that is new. It's just that the church decided that it needed a definition. It needed an official definition and a name, just like the Eucharist being the real presence of Christ. That was believed all the way back at the beginning, but it wasn't until the 1200s that it was given the name transubstantiation to give a more complete definition. Now, development of doctrine, I know I only got a minute or 2 left. In my movie on Mary, when I'm describing the Marian dogmas and how they developed over time, I'm sitting at the place where Mary was born, in Jerusalem, at the Church of St. Anne. There's a church, a sign as you go down into the grotto. It says the Nativity of Our Lady. That's where she was born. And I hold a big red cabbage in my hand, and I said, this represents the deposit of faith. The apostles gave us the deposit of faith from Jesus, and at the death of the last apostle, the revelation was completed. It's called the deposit of faith. It's like putting money in a bank. And that deposit is like the big red cabbage. So I start peeling leaves off of the cabbage. And I say, oh, we didn't see this leaf before. We're getting deeper and deeper into the cabbage, and we're seeing new things. It's not a new theology. It's not a new belief or a teaching. It is the same deposit of faith. But as the church meditates, like Mary pondered these things in her heart, as the church ponders these things in her heart, that which is not always easy to understand becomes explained and understood over time by the Holy Spirit and the magisterium of the church. So we're pulling the leaves off the cabbage, and we get deeper and deeper into the cabbage, and we see newer and newer things, but it's all still part of the original deposit of faith. And that's how, over time, we develop the doctrine. It's not that we're creating new doctrines, it's we're understanding more fully that which was given to us in the first century.
Absolutely. One of the ones that I can't let you go without pointing this out and hearing from you is, for me, one of the things that sort of instantly dissolved any worries I had about Mary when I was in Protestant seminary is when I read the likes of Justin Martyr and St. Irenaeus, yes, pointing out that she's the second Eve. And once you understand that not only is Mary the second Eve, but that this was one of the first really defined ideas that you see all over the most early patristics. Yep. This is all in the 2nd century A.D. Everything else that follows in the development makes sense stemming from that. So what do we mean that Mary is the second Eve, and why was that so important for the early church fathers?
Well, just to explicate that a little further, Tertullian, Irenaeus, and Justin Martyr all said those things, and they were at 3 very far distance of the Roman Empire, which shows that for them to have that as clear teaching that everyone accepted in those disparate, faraway places, it had to be apostolic from the 1st century. What it means is that we have in the Garden of Eden the first Eve, and she tied the knot of sin. The house of cards came tumbling down with her. And so now we have a new Immaculate Conception, a new Mary, who is going to start over again and bring a new humanity. Eve was called the mother of the living. Mary is also called that. She's the mother of the new living of the church. She's the mother of the church. And the interesting thing is that Eve did it in the garden with an Adam and a tree. And we know that Jesus was crucified in a garden. John tells us that in chapter 19. So we have a new Adam, Jesus. He's on a new tree in a new garden, and there's a new Eve there. Mary's right there at the tree too. So we see Mary as a new Eve in a garden, reversing what the first Eve screwed up.
Well, now I have a daunting challenge for you. We have a minute or so left, but really with this idea, the Bible says all have sinned, right? So how can Mary be conceived sinless? What do we do with that? In a minute, go.
Okay, Paul is very careful when he uses phrases like that. He doesn't take them out of their Old Testament context. And in Psalm 14, It says, all have fallen short of glory of God, all have wandered away, and none does what he wants them to do. And then the next verse says, but my righteous people. Oh, wait a minute. He's referring to all of the godless ones that say that there is no God. They rejected him, and there's none on the earth that does good. But then he starts talking about my righteous. So that verse cannot mean that every single human being has sinned in the way that Protestants like to say. Second of all, we have exceptions, don't we? If all have sinned, every single human being has sinned, what about Jesus? He didn't sin. What about mentally retarded children? They have no ability to sin because they can't make a choice to sin. So all of a sudden we have a whole bunch of exceptions to the rule. Then we have the final one, is that Paul's argument is not that every single human being has sinned, but he's talking about the Jews and the Gentiles. The Jews thought they were righteous because they were of the seed of Abraham, and it's the Gentiles who are sinners. Paul is saying, no, all of you are sinners. All have sinned, including you Jews. The two categories, Jews and Gentiles, have sinned. Also, lastly, all does not always mean all. It says that when John the Baptist was preaching down on the Jordan River, all of Jerusalem went down to see him. Do you really believe that every single person in Jerusalem went down to see, not one person missing? They left the city empty for a week while they all went down to hear John. It says all of Jerusalem went down, but it did not mean that every single person was. So we have these exceptions. We need to study the Bible more carefully before we come up with these little sound bites that I used to use as a Protestant and understand the Bible in its fullness.
He's Steve Ray. He's telling us about the Immaculate Conception. As always, it's wonderful to have him on the show. Steve, thanks for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Thank you, Bo. I'm going to be in Israel on the 28th with a full bus, 54 people. We're back. And if anybody wants to go with us, we still have seats open next April.
Blessings. We appreciate it so much, Steve. God bless you on your travels.